rolling on this beautiful day in February where we're having Extemp speeches on, and this is part 2 of February 6th, and we're about to hear from Erica Salazar, who's going to talk to us about something in Russia or Mexico. I can't tell from your thesis. Mexico worried about Russia, right? Okay, good. And you can begin, Erica. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Erica.
Hi, Erica.
Russia is a riddle wrapped inside a mystery, inside an enigma. Those were the words Winston Churchill used to describe Russia during World War II. Those words still ring true today as U.S. intelligence officials confirmed the presence of Russian meddling in the 2016 U.S. presidential elections. It's feared that this will once again occur, this time in the 2018 Mexican presidential elections. Should Mexico be worried? I believe that Mexico should be worried because of 3 reasons. Russia's previous history with Mexico, Mexico's close alliance with the U.S., and early indications that Russia has already begun to use propaganda. Many of you may be asking, why should I care about this? Well, we should not let one country infringe upon the democracy of another, because in doing so, we're allowing the widespread disillusionment of the people in a sacred democratic process, something many of you may have felt after the 2016 U.S. presidential elections. Now, the first reason I believe that Mexico should be worried is because history has shown that Russian intelligence has had an influential stronghold over Mexico's diplomatic relationships. In fact, according to a June 22nd, 1985 New York Times article, during the Cold War, the Soviet Union actually used Mexico as a Western intelligence base so as to monitor U.S. actions as well as encourage the Mexican government to maintain diplomatic relations with communist countries. That same article also states that while Mexico had 50 or so people in their embassy in Moscow, the Soviet Union actually had 300 or more in their embassy in Mexico City, some of who were presumed to be KGB agents or Soviet spies. Now, let's fast forward to the present times. The second reason I believe Mexico should be worried is because it has close links to the U.S., a country that has already been affected by Russian meddling. According to a January 6, 2018 Business Insider article, Sharon O'Neill, who is a senior fellow at for Latin American Studies on the Foreign Council for Foreign Relationships, states that Mexico is an appealing target for Russia because not only is it vulnerable, but also because it has close links to the U.S. in economic, energy, transportation, and national security issues. She also states that Mexico is a vulnerable target because it is also a vulnerable target because it has not only has the own Mexican government interfered in their own elections, but also because, and I quote, Mexico lacks agencies equipped to deal with such interference that could leave Mexico hard-pressed or unable to counter misinformation. Now, the third reason I believe that Mexico should be worried is because there's already been indications that Russian government-funded media outlets have already started to purport propaganda. According to a January 7, 2018 Reuters article, H.R. McMaster, who is the U.S. National Security Advisor, stated in a speech to the Jamestown Foundation that there are already signs that Russia that start to interfere with the Mexican election set for July. Now, for example, in 2016, Russia Today, which is a Russian government-funded outlet, actually started a YouTube series entitled The Battle for Mexico. And this is a Spanish language YouTube series in which the host actually promoted one candidate over the other. So in summary, I've shown you 3 reasons. Russia's previous Russian intelligence interference in Mexico, Mexico's close alliance to the U.S., and early indications of Russian propaganda are 3 reasons Mexico should be worried about Russia meddling in their upcoming presidential elections. There should be no doubt in this room that the Mexican government should be on the lookout for Russian interference if they want to maintain the integrity of their elections. Russia might still be that mysterious country that Winston Churchill once described, but one thing's for sure, they've meddled before and they'll do it again. So let's make sure that doesn't happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Time?
5:15.
5:15. Very nice. Okay, where are we?
Sarah.
Here.
You were like really well spoken, and you
Say
sounded.
your name,
Oh,
please.
hi. My name is Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
So you were really well spoken, and you sounded like extremely credible. Like you knew what you were talking about, and like you knew the information. So that's what I liked.
Thank you, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth.
Yeah, there you go, in the
I
roar
just
of the
thought that
whirlwind.
you don't like say sorry when you mess up. Just kind of like do whatever, like just pretend that nothing happened. And yeah, so you have to give a little pause. It's okay. Don't say sorry.
Yeah, that's a good point, because what it does is call more attention to goof up, and you don't want to do that. Anybody else have a comment before we launch into this? Okay, good. Erica, you chose kind of a tough topic because it's off the site, shall we say. It's Russia and Mexico, which is sort of over there, and we're here. But you try very vainly and to make it significant to us, and I appreciate that. I appreciate how you tried to make it relevant to everybody, and that was good. On the thesis, I thought you could do a better job of numbering them so that your narrative stands out a little better with your voice. So, 1, previous history. 2, strong alliance with the U.S. 3, they've already done it. So, your significant statement, as I already said, was excellent. You did a good job. I'll ask this at the end when I run out of time, but, you know, America has meddled in many people's elections, and so we're sort of the pot calling the kettle black. So I'd be interested to know what you thought about that when you get so up in arms about Russia meddling with Mexico's elections, but we'll come back to that. On your first reason, I would hope you could find a more recent article than 1985. It's a little too old for me, but you quickly followed up with a January 2018 quote. So you redeemed yourself. On your the battle for Mexico and promoting the leftist candidate has already started, so, you know, that was well argued and presented and documented, so yes, it was good. Your summary was good, your conclusion was good, and your tie back to the beginning of the Winston Churchill quote, and your adamant saying, let's be sure that doesn't happen again, was good. What do you think about, does that make us moral eunuchs? Are we unable to comment on any other sort of interference since we have such a wonderful history of interfering in other countries' elections, or what do you think?
I don't believe so. I also read an article that the U.S. has actually started interfering with the Mexican elections, so it's like a two-way sword that they're pointed at both edges. So I don't believe any country should be interfering in any other country's affairs, but that's going to happen regardless. And even if we're like a really powerful country like the U.S., we still couldn't evade that.
So you think it's sort of inevitable?
Essentially, yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Anybody still not give their first speech?
I haven't.
Okay.
Hey. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Irlanda.
Hi, Yolanda.
So in 2016, Virginia delegate Robert G. Marshall, he's a self-proclaimed homophobe. Homophobe in chief is what he calls himself. He had proposed a discriminatory bill that would impact transgender people's access to public restrooms. The following year, Danica Roem, a transgender woman, officially unseated Robert G. Marshall. And the irony in that is that Virginia's most socially conservative lawmaker was ousted by a Democrat who embodies everything that he is against. So today I want to answer the question, what does the election of Danica Roem mean for the transgender community? So her historic win represents the beginning of equity and inclusion for transgender people. And I'll give you 3 reasons. She unseated someone who was doing this job for 20 years plus on primarily an anti-LGBT platform. She's a role model for trans youth, and her mere presence can help with identity formation. And 3, she has the platform to normalize being transgender. So if you are cisgendered, I'm here to remind you that the U.S. is becoming an increasingly intolerant place. Just last year, Donald Trump installed a military ban of transgender soldiers. So equity and inclusion should be in everybody's priorities. Because Dr. Martin Luther King said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice anywhere. So a better world for transgender people is a better world for everyone. So the first reason that I think that Rome's election is a great feat for the entire LGBT community is that she was able to remove Marshall from office. And he is a man who had initiated a lot of anti-LGBT laws, and he triggered the antagonization of trans women. So his hate speech and refusal to acknowledge people further marginalized an already vulnerable community. According to the Human Rights Campaign in 2016, 23 deaths of transgender people involve a clear transgender bias, meaning it is a hate crime. People are targeting transgender people. And speeches as the ones that Marshall would convey sort of trigger this. So the second reason that I think that Danica Roem represents a beacon of hope for transgender individuals is that she helps with identity formation. So identity formation is essentially how transgender people in their transition, they receive verbal acknowledgement from other members of their community that being transgender is okay, and they're not alone. There's other people in their community that also experience this. So this is important because 41% of trans people have said that they have attempted suicide. So that's nearly half. And in 2015, in late 2014, a 17-year-old trans girl committed suicide, and she left a very prominent death note. This suicide note sort of sparked a lot of narrative on what being transgender means in this country. She said, "I want my death to mean something. My death needs to be counted in the number of transgender people who commit suicide. I want people to remember my death and think that's fucked up. Fix it. Fix society, please." So the fact that transgender people are committing suicide at a higher rate than anybody else in our society just points to the lack of empathy that we as cisgender people are showing them. So thirdly, Danica Roem essentially, she has a platform to showcase her humanity and really build tolerance. So with her platform, it's important how she represents herself publicly, because the media has often been responsible for many inadequate representation of trans women. For example, the media outlets showcased Chelsea Manning, a trans woman. I'm sure you are all familiar with her. So she made headlines. And regardless of whether or not you think she was guilty or not, a lot of these headlines, they villainized her, and it was a witch hunt. And they didn't really use her preferred gender pronoun. So I think that Danica Roem can help combat this criminality that has become sort of intertwined with the transgender experience and identity. So in summary, I have shown you 3 reasons why her historic win is meaningful to the transgender community. She unseated somebody who was doing this for 20 years over on an anti-LGBT platform, and she can help with identity formation in the vulnerable trans youth, and she has the platform to normalize being transgender. So there should be no doubt in this room that her historic win is the beginning of equity and inclusion for all. Remember that a better world for transgender individuals is a better world for everyone.
Thank you. What was the time? 5:21. Okay. Where are we?
Camilla.
We're at Camilla, right?
Yeah.
I thought that you did a good job in making it significant to the audience.
Improvement?
Sarita, I thought your speech was really good. I think that you just need a little bit more confidence, because I felt that you knew your speech, you knew it really well. It's just that you were a little bit nervous. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and I think, she seemed to be afraid to bridge that a little bit, so, yeah. Additional comment? Yes, please.
Kaylin, hello.
Hi, Kaylin.
Like a little bit more background maybe on like the Chelsea Manning, is that what it was? Because
Chelsea Manning.
Manning. I like know that name, but I like can't really remember like what it was about. So maybe you could like a brief like this is what that was about to just kind of like refresh people's memories. So sorry, just checking.
Yeah, that'd be
One more.
Yeah, just quickly, hi, I'm Arun.
Hi, Arun.
I would just be careful not outwardly expressing your own political opinion and like making that known to your audience, because it was very expressly clear that you were a liberal. I would more tap or go along the fine line and make it not so explicitly clear and do it more so in implicit ways that you were a Democrat. I too am a Democrat, but just do it more implicitly.
Okay, Arun, explain that. Why?
Because, sure, you can talk about the issue of transgenderism without explicitly saying you're a Democrat.
Yeah.
And just saying that you're a Democrat could, let's say we're in a swing state like Ohio. Sure, we're in California, Muslims are liberals. I'll give you that. But let's say we're in Ohio, we're in a swing state. You could have easily just, off the first 2 sentences, put a bad mark on half their audience right there.
Turn your audience off.
Right, you could have turned your audience off in Ohio or Pennsylvania that's went to Trump. So I wouldn't outwardly tell your audience that you're liberal, and to that extent, liberal.
Okay.
And for focus on the scope of the issue, not so much in your own.
Interesting.
I don't think that's fair calling somebody a liberal.
Huh?
I don't think that's fair calling somebody a liberal, or a Democrat or Republican. I mean, it's just kind of, that's kind of like a negative, isn't it?
Well, that's what as an audience member I got from her, that she clearly is a Democrat. I'm not calling her a Democrat as a negative connotation. I'm a Democrat.
No, you said liberal.
Yeah, liberal in terms of liberal on the spectrum, Democrat, i.e. liberal.
Yeah,
There's different interpretations. Liberal in terms of the political spectrum.
That's not exactly fair to somebody to call them out and say that they're liberals just because you think that they are. Just because she's delivering a speech on something that you might perceive as liberal doesn't necessarily mean that she is.
That's not what I'm saying at all.
Okay, well, let me interrupt this. You guys can get a room up in the front later, continue arguing this out, but you both have good points, and I'd like to see the discussion continue, but we need to go on a little bit now, but thank you for your perspective. Hi there, Irlanda, right?
Yes.
Not Irlanda, Irlanda. Okay, good. Well, you started with a sort of a great story, right? A victory where Danica, an openly transgender candidate, and stress that with your voice, unseated this, well, there's no nice way to say it, bigot, you know, and he was gone, yeah. And it was a good victory for that particular cause. Whether that represents the beginning of equity and inclusion of transgender people, I'm not sure you made that case as successfully, but we'll see. Yeah. I think that this...
2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. Sorry. Your significant statement, you talked about Donald Trump's band, Dr. Martin Luther King, and yeah, they've sort of been, you know, even though you said up above this represents a good thing, this maybe is sort of a regression now, isn't there? They're sort of going back to something else. On the, you talked about removing Marshall from office is your big, wonderful thing, and that was good. Hopes for transgender people, you talked about my life needs to mean something, and that was good. And you gave some evidence of the number of people in the transgender community trying to commit suicide was alarming rate. I would have liked to have had, if you have more specific statistics, that would have been more persuasive. Yeah, I agree. Chelsea Manning is a really tricky person to present because this is, yes, what Chelsea said. This is for the uninitiated. This used to be Bradley Manning. Stole all those national security secrets and turned them over to WikiLeaks. And then was put in the penitentiary in the slammer for 10 years, I guess. And then his last act in office, just before he left, President Obama said, "This is long enough for you." By the way, while she was in there, she decided she's no longer Bradley, but Chelsea. And the Army then paid for her to be transformed into Chelsea. And there was a lot of nasty talk about this. She just did it to get the Army to pay for it and so on and so forth. And whether she's Chelsea or Bradley, there's still people that think she didn't serve long enough for the harm she did to our national security. People that died from the names of spies that she revealed and so forth. So, like, I guess my time is way up, isn't it? Yeah. But anyway, that's...
Thank you.
So, yeah. You did make your case, and you did tie back to it, and it was a nice job, and I just would be careful about Chelsea Manning as a poster child for the transgender community. She's a mixed bag in my judgment. Thank you, dear Linda.
Anybody still have to give their first speech? Okay, volunteers for the second speech. Anybody?
Well, let me look and see. Let's check. Let's see if there's anybody hiding out here. So I was the first. We don't have Ryan in the class. He's in the class. Is Camilla here? So you gave your speech?
I gave my class speech.
Why isn't it recorded? You're fired. Okay. Okay, so Camilla is good. And C-Pand is in the class still. And Melanie has a very ill mother. I'd like you all to think positive thoughts for her. And if you're of a religious bent, send some prayers your way. Very bad situation. Okay, so now it's time for our second Extemp speech. Is that a hand raise? Yeah.
Not me.
I'm very generous with the people that volunteer. I'm very generous with the points. Let's see, how much time do we have? How much time?
A lot of time.
Is the camera running?
Yes, 40, 30 minutes.
30 minutes. We got to use this time, ladies and gentlemen. I know Camilla's ready. I just, I call on her every time. That's not fair. How about our good friend over here? Yes. Are you ready?
Me? Since I volunteered for the first pass.
Yeah, I know you were first the last time.
Yeah, I should get a pass on that.
Well, while we're waiting, I would like to have a little discussion while people are summing up the courage to perform. I'd like to talk about fake news and what it means and how this so-called person is going to counteract it and how we deal with it. I would like to open the discussion by saying that it's got about 1 million definitions, depending on whose axe is being gored. It runs everywhere from the definition of being called fake news if you disagree with what someone said about you, and to inaccurate news or completely false news. I'd like us all to have a clear idea of the difference between fact and opinion when it comes to newspaper reporting. Who can define that or thinks they know the difference and should talk about it intelligently? Yes, please. Hi, Kaylin.
So there's like different news sources that cater to different demographics or political standings, I guess. So like an example would be like Fox News and then like MSNBC. So those two news groups could say stuff that kind of caters towards like MSNBC would talk poorly about Trump maybe, but it could still be accurate, but just with like the connotation that it's not good. We don't like that. But it could still be talking about facts. But then the fact that he doesn't, or like, for example, Trump doesn't like the way that they're talking about something, then he says that's fake news, even though it's like supported by real evidence. Is that like the question?
No, but that's okay, yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah.
Is that someone gonna step on that?
No, that's for the
Okay
camera.
to be there?
That's for the camera, yeah.
That's for the camera, great. Yeah, I want us to have just a beginning, clear idea of the difference between news and opinion. Let's just take the case of a newspaper. Let's take the case of, anybody have a newspaper home? The New York Times, the Wall Street. I was expecting you to carry that.
Read it online.
Read it online.
Save paper.
Oh,
And then buy.
Thoroughly Modern Millie. Okay, good. No more of the hard copy. I get it every morning at my home, delivered at 3:30. I like to have the hard copy in front of me over my coffee. Sorry. Well, can we be clear then, in the beginning part of the newspaper when it says, last night, a bus tipped over, and gosh, 8 people were killed, and 100 were injured. They were taken to this hospital, not in the realm of opinion. We're in the realm of fact, factual presentation. Those are called the news pages. In a traditional newspaper, as you start to scroll back in the newspaper, you get to a section called the opinion section, right? And you have something called the editorials, which is where the newspaper presents their opinion on current subject matter. And then you have the opposite of the editorial section, which is called op-ed. And there you have a diversity of opinion about the news that appear in newspapers. And a mistake a lot of people make is they confuse something that's written in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal in the opinion section as skewing the facts when it's really never meant to be called a factual piece. It's meant to be called an opinion piece. Now, someone mentioned Fox News. That always comes up. Who is that? Not a great example. Not my favorite station. None of them are really, but if you look carefully, many people, before he was fired by Lisa Bloom, former debater, Bill O'Reilly, was called the biggest proponent of fake news. But that's really inaccurate because he never purported to be a news broadcaster. He always was an opinion man. And Fox News has a news broadcast, an hour they give the news of what happened in the world. And then they have these opinion people like Hannity, Laura Ingram, and help me out here, folks.
Judge Janine.
Who?
Judge Janine.
Judge Janine, yeah. These, don't mistake them. These are just pure opinion people. And they're giving their opinion on the facts of the news. But now, I want to throw one monkey wrench into the fire. And that is the New York Times editor is somebody that I know named Dean Baquet. Used to be the editor out here at the Los Angeles Times. And he said that, I don't know how many of you remember this, I don't mean to exclude you over that, but he said that when it came time to weapons of mass destruction, the news people got burned because they reported diligently what the administration presented as facts from what they knew to be facts, which later turned out to be factually incorrect. And he said, I swore as a newspaper man I was never going to get burned again. So at that moment he said he turned his newspaper reporters loose to do more than just record the facts, but to start presenting and looking into some of the bullshit that comes with the facts and start challenging the factual presentation presented by government. And he broke the wall, the traditional wall. And that sort of confounds this whole situation. Any comment on this so far?
Wait, I have a question. So he was saying that they should start reporting on the bullshit stuff too? In addition to the facts?
He was saying, I'm not going to report any more government bullshit. Like, the New York Times supported the war in Iraq. against it because he said we need to go to war with Iraq because they have weapons of mass destruction. The New York Times bought the presentation by Colin Powell. Remember Colin Powell's presentation at the United Nations? But really, I have it on my YouTube channel. It's a very impressive presentation. He was very good. And but it turned out that the facts he presented turned out to be not true. Now, I want to say one more thing, and I see your hands up. Hold your thought, don't lose it. Many people said, they don't say it, this kind of Bush lied. You heard that somewhere? Anybody heard that in your other classes? Bush lied. Or the Secretary of State lied. What is a lie?
Daniel is 6 feet tall. That's a lie.
Are you sure?
What is a, okay, that's an example of a lie. What is a lie? Can anyone define a lie?
When you purposely say something that's not,
When
that you know that's
knowingly say something you know not to be true. And I'm going to just say this on camera for the world to see. Even to this day, there's no evidence that the Bush administration and the Secretary of State, when they got their stuff from the CIA and other intelligence sources, thought the stuff was false. They thought they were presenting the truth as they knew it. Turned out to be false. But you can't really call that fake news. The way we're using it to mean people that are purposefully making up fibs. But you disagree.
Oh no, I just
Have
had
a comment.
I had a question for you. I was wondering if you think that fake news is happening more on one side more than the other, or do you think it's kind of happening across the board?
Gabba, 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 gabba. I think that I have never seen such an onslaught, and I've been around this planet a few times, been around the sun a few times. I've never seen a mass media, so antagonistic to the president that this current mass media is. They've got blood in their meat in their mouth and their teeth, and they scrutinize them like I've never seen a president and presidential candidate scrutinized. Do I think MSNBC stretches the truth more than Fox News? I don't know. There are people, Kim Groening in our department, there are other political science scholars that do content analysis for these questions. I don't know. But Daniel wants to contribute.
So the University of Oxford today released a study that says low-quality, extremist, sensationalist news and conspirational news published in the U.S. was overwhelmingly consumed and shared by a right wing of social network users. So empirically, it's argued that conservatives, right wing, whatever you want to say, share and consume fake news. And then I have an anecdote. I have a story. So I published an article in the Daily Bruin. I defended Keith Fink. He's been on Fox News a few times. He was ousted by the communication department. And basically I argued because of his conservative views, he was fired, he was unjustly treated, blah, blah, blah. And as soon as the article was published, I noticed I had 30 comments, and so I was very aware that the conservative media was like covering the story and like throwing out sensationalist headlines like, oh, conservative professor gets manhandled by liberal university, that sort of stuff. And so for the next 3 weeks as my article was published, I constantly Googled my name just to make sure nobody misquoted me or took my article out of context. And to my surprise, only one conservative website quoted me, and they did that just fine. So yeah, that's just the story I have.
Okay, interesting. My only comment to Daniel's so-called evidence that he just presented now is you really need to look into it, and there's a lot of good studies, and there's a lot of other looks at this between MSNBC and Fox News and what they're doing. But I think you need to be clear when you're watching. If you're going to watch, what's the girl with real short hair? Rachel something?
Tommy
Maddow?
Lauren.
A very bright woman. I really like her. I enjoy watching her. But she's not Rachel Maddow. I said that, yeah. But she's not a newscaster. She doesn't pretend to be. So don't pretend that she's a newscaster. You know. And when I'm talking about newscasters, I'm talking about the people on the major networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, that do that little half-hour show where they tell you the facts of the day, right? So, any other comments? Yes, sir.
To the point about
Name?
Ramin.
Ramin?
Yes.
Hi, Ramin.
Hi. To the point about people like Rachel Maddow and Bill O'Reilly not being newscasters, which I completely agree with. Doesn't somebody, for example, like Bill O'Reilly, I'm sure people on the other side do it as well, it's just the first one that pops to my mind, when they, like, for example, we used to have a segment called the No Spin Zone. Isn't that an attempt on that person's part to kind of portray themselves as a newscaster when they're not actually a newscaster?
Well, maybe. But you raise an important point that I'll grant you, which is that there's a content when you're making opinions. You can't deny that's in there. And since so many people get their news from what their predilection is, and they mistakenly think Rachel Maddow is a newscast, and will be nodding their head, or Bill O'Reilly, well, he's gone, but Laura Dern, or what's her name, Laura Ingram, you know, they nod their head off at her. They're considering that watching the news, and they're taking in that information as news. And I think we need to have really up the sophistication of our, pardon my French, bullshit detectors now, folks, to be able to discern what's happening here. And for example, Zoe's presentation was, an example of just pretty much the news version of President Trump's visit, without any of the overlay of, the big fat failure, he didn't accomplish a damn thing. He should have done this, this, and this. Okay, what time is it? Who's ready to do their? You ready to do your speech?
No, I have a question.
Yeah.
So, who do you think, or who do you think would be a really good, credible source to either read or watch when it comes to news in general?
Yeah, okay. I don't know. But I'll tell you who I read. I read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal every morning for my so-called balance. And they have dueling editorials. For example, in this latest controversy with these memos that were released, you know about the memos, right? Everyone knows about the memos that were released by the Congressional Investigation Committee. They thought that the Wall Street Journal thought this was an important factual, mostly factual. They said there was no opinion in there, just a factual presentation of what the FBI did to the secret court, which is they went and presented a document that was paid for by Hillary Clinton's campaign, presented it as their reason to start a counterintelligence investigation against the sitting political party. And didn't tell the judges that that was their source of information. They made it imply or seem that it was something else. Now, so the Wall Street Journal had that take on it, so they said, we need to hear from the court. We need a reform in what the FBI and the Justice Department can just walk into the FICA court and spy on anybody and say anything and get away with it. This presents a dangerous precedent in our society. The New York Times, on the other hand, said, no, this is not the smoking gun they claimed it would be. And one of the things they said, there was one footnote in their presentation, and they said, we need to wait for the Democrats' version of the truth to come out. So that was the dueling, to answer your question, I got those two perspectives. As far as a news source, and a lot of people laugh at me, but I read The Economist every week, cover to cover. I consider it my Bible, but that, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times, you know, I will occasionally tune into Rachel Maddow, and I occasionally tune into Laura Ingraham. I respect her legal approach. I'll never watch Sean Hannity. Is his name? He really is very tough to sit through for me. Even though I know he's just opinion, but I just find him real tough to sit through. But those are my choices. What are your choices?
I honestly stopped reading and watching the news a long time ago because I just didn't feel like I was getting anything. So
Yeah. Well, I'll say this: if you were only getting it off of Facebook, you've been, pardon my expression, you've been effed. You know, because even Facebook admits they were had by the Russians and infiltrated and presented with lots of articles that are phony and wrong and not true, and they're attempting to work people up in the wrong way. And so a lot of people have come to rely on social media for their news, and I find that trend troubling, but I feel like I'm pushing a rock up the hill with telling my debates to read the Wall Street Journal. I posted on our website, but and give me a subscription. Any other questions or comments? How's our time? We still have time for one more.
Can we go some like logistics?
Yeah.
Okay, so y'all should be ready to give your second speech next week. And did you sign up for your third speech yet? No? Can we get that going?
Yeah, let's do that today. Yeah. And I want to say one other thing. Since we wasted a whole class period now, it could have been devoted to second speeches. If you're called upon and I randomly run my hand down the list and you say, I'm not ready, you'll just get a 0, and if we have time to come back to you, you can take a grade lower to do your speech, okay? Fair enough. But everyone should be ready. Don't count on, the princess here to be ready, or, the guy from San Diego to be ready. And, people that you know are reliable to be ready, and you'll be able to go 2 weeks from now. Everyone should be ready. Okay? All right, the logistics, yes. Yeah. Okay. Did everyone return my copy of the